Good morning. How are you all doing today? A little tired, I see in the room here. Okay. Did you guys have a good time yesterday? We had a great keynote yesterday. It was awesome. Our good friend, I saw him walk in. Where are you? There you are, right in front of me. I can't see right in front of me. Great job. It's great for you to come over here. And I want to say, again, another thank you to the organizers who put this together. Let's give them a round of applause for Max and Sherry and all of them. It's a lot of work putting on a conference, a lot of work. And it's not always the things that you see that are the difficult parts, the things you don't see, the problems that they take care of under the covers. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for having me here and for putting on this great event. And to the sponsors, the best way you can support ngVikings and other events is to engage with the sponsors and thank them for coming as well. If they have a good time, they continue to come, which is, they're here to meet you all. So it's a great thing. And thanks for coming to listen to me talk. It's a little rare for me because at my house, my kids don't want to hear me talk at all. So I come here and it's like a different world. They're like, I like you. And when I go home, they're like, get out of my way, Dad. Drop me off around the corner so my friends don't see me with you. Yeah, you know. So today's keynote, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a lot of developers do, or maybe they have a team that does sometimes. My good friend Ward Bell, I'm not sure if he's woke up yet today. You'll see him. If he was here, you would know. Let's just put it that way. If you don't know what I mean yet, look for the man in the craziest outfit you can find today, and that will be Ward. A good friend of mine. We do a lot of stuff of developing software. We write code. We're always worried about, is it small, is it fast, how good does it look, is the user experience great? These are all really important. But when we're done, we need to put it somewhere. We need to put it up on the internet. We need to put it into a cloud server somewhere, anywhere, Amazon, Google, Azure, now, wherever you want. And to do that, it takes effort. There's things we have to do to get ready. Recently, my team, I work at Microsoft, and my team, we looked at many different products and things out there, ways to deploy to the cloud. And the first thing I realized after talking amongst the 7 of us is that there were more than 7 ways to deploy to the cloud. And we didn't all realize this at first, because you just do it the way that you know, right? You learn a certain way and just do it. But there's so many different ways to get there, and none of them are perfect. So I wanted to talk about how can you make it easier to get to the cloud, and talk about some of the options and some of the pros and cons, but also ways that you can solve problems before you get further in front of you. For example, when you press the button, whatever button it is, to deploy to the cloud, do you know what's happening behind the scenes? Do you care what actually happens? Where is npm install going to run if you're running a Node app? On your machine? On a CI server? In the cloud? Will it be different depending upon where it runs? Hopefully not, but very likely it will be. So things like this I have to start thinking about so we can solve these problems before we get there. The good news is good tooling makes this a lot easier. So once you have good tooling in place, it makes everything easier. Think about Angular. When Angular version 2 first came out, before the CLI was ready, the hardest problem about Angular was not Angular. It was starting to use Angular, right? Getting the thing ready. System.js, Webpack, configuration. Anybody here remember the days of Gulp and Grunt and Broccoli and all that stuff? Anybody miss them? I kind of like Gulp, but yeah, you know, it was a lot of work to put that stuff together. Once you have good tooling like the Angular CLI, things got a lot easier. And now we can focus less on the repetitive tasks of putting our code together and instead just work on Angular, which is what we love and what we like to do. So the good tooling aspect is really helpful. So I want to talk about a few different things about what happens once you're done coding. First of all, we need to optimize our code a little bit. Optimization is a funny topic because a lot of people will talk about optimization at large companies as this really important thing, and it is, but when do you focus on it? There's a balance like anything. If you think about it all the time and that's all you're doing, you're probably optimizing too often. It's a good thing to check every couple of sprints or every couple of weeks or depending how long your project is. If it's a 1.5-year long project like some I've been on, we did it about every 2 months, made sure that nothing changed, everything was still good, like a health checkup. You want to make sure that you're looking at these things so it's not the day before you go live and you realize, oh my gosh, I have a 40 meg JavaScript file. What am I going to do? Thankfully, we saw yesterday we can make it 5K now with Ivy, right? That was the promise. All Angular apps will be 5K? Yes. Yeah, he just said yes, so we're good. You're on video. Brad will love that. I'm kidding, Brad. So we'll look at how we can do some optimization. After we're done optimizing, we want to build our code. Now, we build all the way through the project, but we want to make sure we look at special things to help get the builds ready. And this goes beyond the Angular CLI. And then finally, we want to deploy our code. Put it somewhere in some cloud server of our choice. So we're going to look at all three of these aspects. We'll start off with building Angular. Well, the CLI helps us do things, and it's funny because everybody talks about building a CLI app and how great it is that it does code generation. I've actually met a lot of developers who use the CLI, but they don't use the generation side of the code. It's interesting. Everybody uses things differently. So we can set up our project for routing and using SAS and do dry runs for practicing it. But is that really the value we get out of the CLI? Generating new components and services and directives. In some cases, it can help, but could you just open a new file and copy and paste or use a snippet? Sure. The real value comes in after you start writing your code and you start doing the building processes or the linting or the testing. So we'll take a look at how some of those can help for us. I like to think of this about two different personas. When we do ng build, we're building that for us. When I'm working on an Angular project, I might do an ng build 100 times a day. Might be through ng serve, where it's constantly running, but I'm building all the time. And think about the persona of the type of person who wants ng build. That's all of you, someone you're very familiar with. When you build, what do you want? You want the build to be as fast as possible, right? You're building the code, you want to see it in the browser, you want to make your changes, go, I forgot that, let me go fix it. And it's constantly running. Well, to make it super fast to happen, we're willing to give up some things. Do you really care if it's got cache busting built in when you're doing a development server? No. It's going to run in my browser. I'll turn off caching and just let it keep running. Do you really need it to be as the 5K on your local development server, as small as possible? No, you just want it to work right. You want it to work consistently. So speed is the ultimate factor when you're a developer for the ng build. What's the persona of a person doing a production build? That's your users. Your users don't care that you compile and build 100 times a day. They're not doing that. Their important factor is the user experience. They want the end result of the application to be so fast that they don't even think about it. It's just there. The experience is great, the animations run good, and it just is an afterthought to them. They don't think about, I don't care how it was built. I don't care that Simona built this app with AOT turned on. They just don't. You might be proud of it, but they don't care. They want that user experience. So this is why we have two different flags. And if you think about it, it's really important because you run that production build just when you're about to deploy, but the other one, the ng build, you run all day long. A little refresher on some of these things that do. It's not all conclusive list, but this is some of the major things that we get out of ng build versus prod. So we get cache busting. Super important because we want to make sure that we get cache busting out of a production build because if we deploy new code, we want our users to get a new version of the file. Can you imagine having to run to every computer in the world and go and turn off their cache every time you deployed your new app? This is something we did 15 years ago, by the way, in companies. It was awful. Say, hey, we deployed a new version. Would everybody please destroy your cache and reload? No, thank you, right? So having cache busting, super important in the application. Source maps, do you want them in production? Probably not. But you certainly want those as a developer. As a developer, do you want uglification? Not really, because I want to make sure that I get something that's a little more readable when I do my source maps, so I can do some debugging. But in production, yeah, I want the best speed I can get. Bundling, I actually do want this in both places. Because I never want to build something locally on my machine, and then when I go production, it runs differently. And by having the file bundles the same kind of bundles in both, it really helps make sure there's no surprises there. So we get that advantage. Plus, you want to make sure that if you have a 1,000-file project, you're not serving 1,000 files locally. Because even that could get crazy because of the way HTTP works. Code splitting. Do you want that to work local and production? Yes, because then you can test out your lazy loading and other features that you have. So we do that. AOT for Angular, do we want that at build time versus production? It could be great if we had it at build time for when we're doing daily development, but we definitely want it when we go live. And then finally, some of the later features that we've added inside of Angular that the team's given us, tree shaking, which gets better and better, it seems like, with every version, which allows us to remove more and more dead code. Now, if it's just you running a project, you're probably pretty good about getting rid of your dead code. I've worked on very, very large applications, and people come and go on the team like on a weekly basis. I worked on a project for a year and a half with 150 developers, and I think at any one time there were over 100 people working on this. People came and went, and I couldn't keep up with dead code. If I had had this feature, it would have been fantastic. But we were constantly trying to figure out what code don't we need anymore so we can get that bundle size down and make it more fast. The great thing is, if you've never thought about any of those things, you don't have to, because the Angular CLI does this for you. It does all these great things for you, so it can make them smaller and faster. This is the advantage of great tooling. But on top of it, even when you're done, there's important moments in your development cycle where you have to look at your code and go, I don't know everything that's in there, or even if I do, let me make sure what I think's in there matches to what actually is in there. And we can use tools like Source Map Explorer, or we can look at tools like the Webpack Bundle Analyzer. Both of these tools are available in NPM, are great tools. I use them both because it gives me a slightly different look of each. They give you a heat map of what's inside of your bundles. They're great for showing, this is what I thought was in my code, this is what's actually in my code. And I think it was like 6 months ago, RxJS, several months ago, it doesn't happen now. RxJS for a while, before they had pipeable operators, there was a lot of times I go and look at code, it happened with my own company at Microsoft even, where I saw a line of code, very innocuous, it said import RxJS inside the code. And everywhere else in the code, it was importing exactly the right pipe that it needed. But in this one spot, I saw that line of code, and what triggered me on that is I went and looked at this heat map. And this heat map showed not only were they using map and catch, there we go, so like a heat map like this, there was a big red box up here with about 1 million little tiny rectangles in it. And I was like, uh-oh, what's that? And you can click onto these little heat maps, and I dove down in, it was RxJS. I didn't just see like catch and map, I saw all 100 and some odd RxJS operators. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure this project isn't using every single RxJS operator. Probably no project in the world does, other than like the RxJS docs, right? So they can show it, or Rx marbles. I'm like, this is probably not a great idea. And then I went searching through the code and I found import RxJS, which means import the whole thing. And the problem was, at the time, and I think it's still true, if you do that line of code, it will not, Angular CLI will not be able to tree shake it because it doesn't know which ones you're using, which ones you're not, because there was no symbols in that line of code. Now with RxJS, we can actually import just the pipes that we need, and it's better. But this is why looking at tools like this is really important. You can start to see, what am I using, how big is it, the relative size of the rectangle shows you how much space is being used up inside your project. So we've got great tools to build with. We use the tools, we trust them, but it's always good to take a gut check, look at the tool analyzers that we mentioned at the back, and I'll have links to all this stuff towards the end of the presentation. But there's other ways we can deploy. So I mentioned recently my team, we looked into, and I charged them all with this task of, go find a competitive tool out there. We work for Azure on Microsoft, so go find a competitive tool, any tool. And some of them took 2 up. And I want you to show me, learn how the tool works, and show me in 5 minutes or less to the whole team, how does that tool deploy to the web? What are people doing? And we looked at things like Now and Netlify and AWS and Firebase and Surge. And there were tools I never even heard of. And of course, there's Heroku and DigitalOcean and all these others. What was amazing about it was some of them were very similar, and others are a completely different way to get to the cloud. And it blew my mind of how many ways, because I already knew about 5 or 6 ways to get to the cloud. And I don't mean tools, but like different options and things you could do. But this just blew my mind at how many new ways there were. And some of them were easier. There's somebody behind me, isn't there? How's it going? It's your turn.
Yeah, no.
There you go. Let's give it up for the photographer. My team will tell you, I'm Italian, and my family comes from Sicily. I grew up where you never let somebody get behind you. If you ever go to a restaurant with me, I take the chair with the back to the wall. All right, so when we looked at these tools, it was really fun, actually, and what I thought would be my favorite tools weren't in some cases. So one thing I learned is there's a lot of people out there who deploy using a CLI, not just with Angular, obviously, but just with a single command you can deploy to the web. And this is something that I found really interesting, because some people like buttons, some people like CI systems, some people like CLIs. There's different kinds of developers out there, and DevOps people. So we were working with our Azure team to talk about this, and we started figuring out, what do we want to do to get to the cloud? I said, forget the product. Let's think about what are the steps I want. I want to take my code and get it up there. Well, yeah, great, but what does that mean? I want whatever it is to look at my package JSON. And I want it to look at there and look at the node version. I want it to know whatever node version I'm using, that's what it should be using. Same with NPM. I want it to look at those packages and install them for me. I want it to build my Angular assets. I want ng build with production flags to run. If I have a Node Express server, I'd like it to be there as well when it gets there, if I combine the two in a project. And then copy everything in the dist folder to the cloud. This is important. For a lot of security reasons, and for just your own sanity, it's good to only deploy your production code. You don't want to deploy your source code to the cloud. I've done this myself. I've seen some times where take the entire app, the source code, put it up in the cloud, and the node server is actually serving everything in the folder, but people who follow the happy path never see all that code. But if you actually knew there was a file on the server called package.json, you could go and type in /package.json and you'd see it. That's probably not a good idea. There are people who put security secrets in their source code and then deploy them to servers. I've done that once or twice by accident. And that happens. That's not a good thing, right? You don't want to be that next company on the internet. It's like, oh yeah, such and such got hacked. So there's reasons you don't want to do this stuff. Plus, wouldn't it be nice if you just deploy just the code that you needed? So there's a couple ways to do this. This is actually an experimental flag inside of Azure. This flag may change. We're trying to shrink it down. If Simona and Asim, you moved Asim. Where are you, Asim? Raise your hand. He left the room. He's fired. Asim and Simona work for me, by the way. If you haven't seen them yet, absolutely see them. Great speakers. So we were working on trying to figure out how can we make this like super simple to deploy. Wouldn't it be great if you could just go into a folder, type in whatever cloud server you want, Azure, Firebase, like Firebase has Firebase deploy, Now has Now, Surge has Surge, Azure has AZ. Wouldn't it be great if you just go into a folder, say, AZ web app, that's what I want to create a new one, and then if you want to optionally give it a name, like Vikings rule, just go ahead and deploy that to the app cloud. Let's see if we could do a live demo that uses Azure and the cloud right now to see how that would work. There's nothing better than doing live demos of the cloud in front of all your friends. All right, so here we have an app. And that's not the app. Let's go down here. So we can see our Angular app. Ooh, let me change the theme. I think we said that is easier to see in the back. A lot of yups. Cool. We've got heroes and we've got villains. Everybody knows the Tour of Heroes. You know I love that stuff. So all this stuff is inside of our application. We go look at some of the code. You see lots of fun stuff in here. If we want to take this app and deploy it to the cloud, first of all, again, I don't want the source code. So what I want to do is I want to build it. And just to save time, I built it already. It's over here in my server folder. And if we go back to the code, you can see what's in here. Notice the root has my node server. It's a very simple Express server. It's not production ready. It's just a demonstration. But we've got a node server over here. We've got the package JSON that it needs. I'm making sure my node server only serves the contents inside of this folder called public web. You can call it whatever you want. www, happy days, anything. Inside of there is all of my Angular assets. And I recently built the stats JSON so I could show you that screenshot. Here's my chunks, here's my pictures, everything's in there. But notice, because my node server is here, and over on the other side, I've got this public web that I'm serving. This is a variable of telling you where am I going to serve the code. So the node server is not going to serve the root. It's going to serve whatever is in that folder. Very simple concept, but it really saves you from having to worry about anybody peeking into your node modules, for example, on a production web server. Or looking inside, hey, what are the dependencies of this app? Let me go do /package.json. Don't want to do that. So everything in the dist folder is ready to go. Well, what if we go back over here? I'm going to go down in size once. And we just type in, I'm in the dist folder right now. You can't really see that in the blue. Over here. I'm in my distribution folder, and I want to say, hey, go up to Azure, create a new project. We'll call it ngVikings 01. And let's see here. It's giving me some information as I go along. Every cloud has different settings and configurations. What all these commands do in now Surge, Netlify, Firebase is they have different settings that they'll kind of look at and say, all right, we're going to set up like, what's a resource group? Resource group's like a folder, tells you where to put it. There's a subscription. A subscription in Azure is what kind of server are you getting? Is it like a 4-core, a 2-core, etc.? I don't care. I just want to see it in the cloud, right? This command's just like, you know what? I'm going to do it for you. I decided I'm going to put it in the central US because that's really close to Finland. I deployed it when I was in the US for the first time. And then it's going to go ahead and pick out like the rest of it. It's telling me the SKU, which is standard. I'm like, sure, that sounds great, whatever. It told me node version, did it? Yeah, 6.9. That was the default that we had there. I'm actually getting the team to change that to 8.9 as a default. You can change that after the fact. But these are just some nice defaults. Well, what if you want to configure or change it or do something else with it later? Yeah, absolutely. You can always go inside of Azure and change this stuff, same way you can with Google Cloud or Amazon. But it's nice when you just want to see it to do that. Well, where do I go when I'm done? By the way, the other thing I'm going to put down here at the end is going to be like the link to where the heck did it get deployed. And I think I opened up a link up here. I will zoom in so you can see it. I don't like zooming on people because it kind of makes you nauseous. Woo! So this is up on Azure right now. We'll refresh again in really loud, large colors. And there you go. So the app is running in the cloud right now, and you can see our favorite heroes are on display. And no, I didn't know how to spell those, so I had to go to Viking History Channel Wiki last night to figure out how to spell these names. We're going to get Maxime to pronounce them for us later. I love this one right here. I can't pronounce that. But she's a shield maiden. How cool is that? We also have some villains, by the way. This is what happens when you're not in the room, Asim. All right. So we'll go back over here. So we were able to take the app that we have and quickly deploy it. But there's probably a lot of questions you have, like, great, I deployed the app, but again, what version of Node do I have? Is it running the same version of NPM? I mean, it happens to work here, right? Whew, feels good. But what if something goes wrong? Can I tinker with it? How do I set like app settings? My app happens to have a lot of environment variables. And I have an example env file, so you don't see my real keys. But here's a file showing like my environment variables. I have to set these up, right? So I need to be able to get to the server and configure this kind of stuff if I want to. So we need ways to do that, and that's fine. We can go up to the portal, Azure's portal to do that. Firebase calls there's a console, which always confuses me, by the way. When you hear console, do you think of web browser? I think of the terminal. I don't know, maybe my head's wrong. But I love the Firebase ones, and I love the Azure portals. Amazon's is okay as far as usability for me, but I like going up there to be able to configure it. I like when I have an CLI, it's quick to get to the web, and then I can go configure if I want to. But that's not always the thing I want. So I mentioned I worked at some large companies, and we had this cycle. I mean, this cycle is pretty synonymous with what everybody does, right? You work with Node, you get your assets together, you deploy what's in your dist folder. But what happens if the Node versions don't match on your machine and what's in the cloud? What happens if you're developing on Windows and you're developing on Linux? I know Sonder like that, right? I like it on a Mac OS. I'm running Node 8.9, you're running Node 6.9, you're running Node 0.10.36. Why, Simona? Anyway, we're all running different versions. Things work differently on different versions of Node, right? One of the most common things I had happen at one of the last companies I worked at prior to my role at Microsoft was we would deploy stuff all the time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of apps running on Node. Our CI servers were building these things. And they weren't using Docker with the CI servers at the time, so they had to stick to a version of Node on each server. So if you built with whatever version of Node, they had that version of Node NPM on that CI server. And about once every 3 or 4 weeks, I'd get a phone call from some frantic developer team saying, our app won't build, we're supposed to go live today, oh my God, what have you done to me? You know, I'm eating lunch, I'm like, what did I do? What do you mean what I did? Turns out, long story short, it got so funny with this that the CI manager, whenever I called him, he'd just go, somebody installed another version of Node on the CI servers, didn't they? Like, yep. People would upgrade Node, like, oh, let me go get the new version of Node, that sounds awesome. And they'd run it, and some random projects would just stop building, and everything would go to poop. And then it wouldn't be a good thing. So making sure you've got the right OS, the right version, that's really important. How do you do that? Do you just hold a baseball bat over the person's shoulder, make sure that they don't do it? You're nodding your head. That's not good. Don't work with that guy. I hope you're not a recruiter. So you want to be able to do this with confidence, right? Once you're done writing code, it's kind of nice to just go, I pushed it to GitHub, it's done, and it's just going to work in a couple of minutes, right? It's going to be up there. So how do we get that? Dun, 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 Docker. Docker is something I wasn't the first person to jump on board and go, oh, this is amazing, it's great, I love it. At first, I was one of the first people to go, oh my God, why do I need this? And then I started running into these problems. Now, the great thing about Docker is if you're an early adopter, the tooling wasn't great. It's gotten so much better, and a lot of the editors actually help you with this stuff too. We're going to see this here, but I'm kind of a control kind of guy. I like control of my code. And if I write it in Docker, it goes into this thing called an image in a container, and it hides everything from me, and I can't see my code or touch it or feel it, and I get scared. Like, once I can't see my code, I get worried. So the first thoughts I had were, okay, if I'm going to trust Docker, I need to understand how this thing works. So the ways I got comfortable with it was like this. What is a Docker file? This is the thing that everybody talks about with Docker. It's a Docker file. It's really a self-contained script. It's a recipe on what you do to build your app. Every time you build your app, you're running certain commands. Maybe you started your app 6 months ago. It's got the version of Node, the version of NPM. It knows where your folders are. It knows the ng build step with the right flags that you want to use. All that's just written down into a script. And it's configurable to adapt to different environments. So you can have like environment settings. So you could build a Docker file to work on your machine, on Max's machine, on a CI server, and a test server. You could have a load balancing server, a staging server, a QA server. They could all hit different databases. It's all good. So you write this file, and you're like, okay, what's in here? This is like a very basic Docker file saying, what's my OS, what's my version of Node? Hopefully you're using something newer than 6.11. This is a screenshot. But you're using Node 6.11 Alpine. This is a standard image up on Docker Hub. Docker Hub is kind of like NPM for Docker. It's a place you go to get Docker images that are pre-built, and a lot of people use the Alpine images for Node. They're basically just a version of Linux that's trusted and tried. It's very slim, not a lot on it, but it does have Node ready to go. And then I copy over my files. I run npm install. I do my ng build. And then I just crank up the port and run node index.js. Who wants to type all this? I know I didn't. When I first got into using Docker, I'm like, I don't know what this means. And what is run and copy? There's also command. There's expose, but then there's also like ports. There's other settings you can do. Exporting of ports. Like, how do I know what to do? So me being me, I decided enough was enough. Let's use VS Code to do the work. So VS Code, my favorite editor. By the way, I have some little trivia for you. Does anybody here know what the original code name of VS Code is? It's a city in Europe, in Switzerland. Ticino. Ticino. It's actually one of the cities that one of the creators of VS Code is fond of. His name is Eric Gamma. Any of you familiar with Eric Gamma? Have any of you ever used a pattern in coding? Yes? Like one person's like, yeah, I've heard of a pattern. If you've ever used any pattern in coding, Eric is one of the people who kind of define these things. Remember the Gang of Four book back in the 90s and 2000s? separation of concerns, principles, sole responsibility patterns, all that stuff. Anyway, he's one of the creators of VS Code, named it Ticino. I thought that was a great name. Microsoft decided to call it Visual Studio Code. It stuck. I think Ticino's good. Ticino, you know? What are you working with? I'm working with Ticino. You know, sounds like the guy down at the Italian store. So up here, inside of Ticino, you can use Docker. It's got these great commands like, hey, add Docker files to the workspace. Boom, that's awesome. Because guess what? There's more than just a Docker file. There's Docker Compose. There's debugging versions of it. There's Docker ignores, like a git ignore. I don't want to have to type all this stuff. So VS Code can do that for you. And then you can get that from this extension up here. It works for any type of project you're working with in Docker. But what if you want a multi-stage Docker file? You want to get a little more advanced with it. Like my project isn't just Angular. It's got Angular and Node together, and I have certain folder structures set up for it. You probably have different ones. So what I did was I decided, you know what, there is a pretty standard convention I've used, and I added a snippet to my Angular extensions, which you can get up here, and what it'll do is something like this. You type into the file, Docker Angular, and you just type in what you want to do, and it gives you prompts for different settings, like your ports or your folder structures. Up top, you can see that I'm basically building the Angular app using the Angular CLI. The second stage builds my node server with Express. And then the third stage takes those two together, the output of both, just the production files, and puts them on the final image that we use for Docker. I like breaking it out like this because it's a lot easier to debug and kind of think about it as opposed to doing it all at once. You'll also notice at the top line, I'm using an image in Docker Hub called John Papa Angular CLI. This is one that I made. It's up in Docker Hub. You're welcome to use it. It's built on top of the Node Alpine image for Node 8.9, and all it has additionally is the recent version of Angular CLI. Why? Because as often as I run this script and I rebuild for Docker, the Angular CLI, I don't have to run npm i-g Angular CLI in this image. It's already there. So it saves me that 30 to 45 seconds every time I build this image. It also means that you're relying on me to get off my butt and put that image up there in the Docker Hub. So if you don't want to do that, you can do one yourself as well. But these snippets are great. I love snippets. You don't know me very well. I love snippets. Anything that writes code for me is fantastic. And then you can change anything you like in here. So the idea is, I want to make sure that I'm comfortable with Docker. I want to create my Docker file. We solved that problem. I want to build it and run it. Docker will handle that for me with VS Code. Most important part is I didn't solve yet that problem of I want to be able to touch and feel my files. How do I make sure that I can look at what's in Docker and it runs the same as it did locally in my machine? That's where debugging Docker really comes in. So let's take a look at how that works. Okay, I'm going to go down in font size once there. If we look inside of our app, you'll see I've got a bunch of Docker files. Let's blow them away. Isn't that fun? I'm actually going to save one property because I always forget it. But let's blow away all of my Docker files. Phew, they didn't exist. All right, now if we go back up to the top and I type in to the command prompt, Docker add files to workspace. Everybody see that up there? Exciting. What platform do you have? Of course it's Node. Why isn't that first? Simona, can you have him fix that? What port do you want? 3001. And then when you're done, you'll notice it added back a bunch of files. If you look in there, there's a Docker ignore. There's a Docker file. That's not what I want. There's a Docker compose and a Docker debug. Notice the difference between these two files. The debug version exposes the debugging port and runs Node with the debugging command, which is kind of nice, just out of the box. So let's go to that Docker file, and let's just blow away what's in there. Now, I'm going to run docker-angular multi-stage. That's my name, that's good. Don't you love that your snippet has my name in it? Node version, that's good. My folders are good. Down at the bottom, my port is actually 3001, so I'll change that. And I'm good. I'm all set. So now, I'm going to go over to the Docker Compose. Somebody's happy outside. I'm not actually going to, I have a lot of environment settings, so instead of making you watch me type in all my settings. I've got an env file, so I'm going to put that setting in there to do that. And if you go back and look at the example, it's this kind of stuff. Where's my database? Where's my port? Is it development mode or not? All that fun stuff. And now I can run commands. I can go back up to the command palette, and I can do docker compose up right there. Pretty cool. Let's do it. Then it prompts me in VS Code for which version of Docker Compose do you want, the regular or debug? Well, I would like to debug, so I'm going to choose that one. And now, Docker in its infinite wisdom is going to build really fast, right? So it's going to build the image up so we can run that and run a container from that image right here. I don't like that there's no output. Let me do this. There you go. Sometimes there's a refresh bug. So you can see that it ran through and built the whole image up here. And now, there's an extension that I mentioned, that Docker extension has a little pane over on the left-hand side. And in there, you can see there's an image up top. That's not an hour ago. But if I refresh, it'll say now. And it's running a container that's been up for 5 seconds. Well, what's inside that container? First thing I can do is right-click on that, show logs. Let's do that. Now, if we look at the logs, you're going to see down at the bottom, it's listening on port 3001. Pretty cool. It's running Mongoose. Things look pretty happy. Let me click on 3001. It's in the browser. And now you can see right at the top, there's my app running inside of Docker. Pretty cool. Where's my data? That's a good question. We'll see what happens. And then when we go back into our app, oh, one more thing. There's, I want to see the files that are in there too. If we right click on it again, we choose attach shell. I like this. Type ls, now you can see these are the files that are inside my Docker container. And you can map into them so you can change them on the fly if you want to. If you want to see like what's in my public web folder, there's the Angular assets, everything's ready to go. So you're not prohibited from doing anything you would normally do, which is really cool. Now, in my app, I've got a node server, and you can see I've got some breakpoints set inside of a put of a hero. We would need heroes to do that, though. Something died, something died. I wonder what died. That's a good question. Let's do one last check. Let's restart the container. Sometimes life is happier when you restart containers. Awesome. It's not happy. We're going to pretend that worked. And we're going to pretend you can see code right there. So we're going to put a breakpoint up on getting of heroes as well. Now, when I run through this, how do you debug inside of Docker? VS Code's got this little button over here where you can do debugging. And you notice I've got an attach Docker to node. If I click on this button over here, I've got a configuration. And this comes when you hit add configuration, you can set these up. It's basically telling Docker where to look for my code and how to attach to it once it's running. Then I can just hit my run button over here. And it's running. And the bar will change the bottom to a different color so you know that you're actually in debug mode when you're done with that. And you'll also see this debugging bar up at the top of the screen. So we go through there, we come back into our file. The breakpoints are still red, that should be good. I should be able to refresh, and now we can walk into our code and find out what the heck is wrong with this thing. And it's probably not going to tell me, is it? Yeah, we're just getting through the error. Maybe my database is down. Oh, there it is. Who did that? All right, so there's my data. So let's do a put now. We're going to change this one here. Now let's go and change Simona. We're going to change you, Simona. You're the wielder of the service worker. And we'll just put PWA's rule in here instead. And we hit save. And I thought we had to put, oh, we didn't put it on this one. Hero service. There is our put. We didn't hit our breakpoint. Oh, you know what? I did it on the wrong one. That's why. Okay. So we can walk through the code, we can debug it, we can step through here. And when we're done, we can disconnect, which is kind of nice. Somebody's really happy outside. So you can debug through the code. This is what made me comfortable with Docker. The moment I could say, Docker isn't going to change what I'm doing. I hate when tools, somebody comes out and says, there's this new thing out there. You've got to use it. It's amazing. It'll change everything about how you do everything every day. That doesn't sound exciting to me. I know how to do what I know how to do. When you say you can stop doing everything you're doing and do it a completely different way, you're like, awesome, I'm no longer an expert. So I like tools that help me do the things I know how to do. I know how to debug, I know how to write code. Awesome. All right, so we solved that problem. We haven't yet then figured out how do we get Docker to the cloud. Well, again, what's cool is we can compose our files right here with Docker inside of VS Code. When we're done, there's other things we can do too. In the images, we can tag them by right-clicking on them. We can also push them to a Docker registry, like Docker Hub. Azure's got a container registry, or you can have a private registry if you want to as well. Just by right-clicking on those. There's also commands that you can run from Docker CLIs to do this. So what we want to do is we want to compose it first. Then we want to tag the image. The tag just gives it a name. And then we want to push it. These are 3 separate Docker CLI commands. Or again, we can just do it through the tooling. And then finally, we want to push it to a web cloud. We're going to try this live. And if it all works, I'm going to be happy. Let's see here. I did it from hotel Wi-Fi last night. That was good. So I can't use this container. Why can't I use this container in the cloud? Well, I could, but it's got my debugging port open. I don't really want to do that. And it's got all my debugging settings and my development environment variables. Not what I want to do. So what I'd like to do, close those, is I want to run this Docker file. And remember I had that compose file for debugging? I don't want to use those ports and inspections. Instead, I want to use this one, where node environment set to production, and I'm only exposing a single port, the one I want. And my image is just being called Vikings. Why not? So what I want to do is go back to the command, type docker compose up, and this time I'm going to choose the regular docker compose YAML, and it's going to build that. And it should be relatively quick because not a lot changed here, right, between the debug and the regular. So this should take only a couple of seconds to build it. Hopefully it doesn't prove me wrong. And then everything works. And then once we've got that image, yay, it's over here that it's not 9 hours ago. Guess who's filing a bug today? You can then tag the image. Now, inside of VS Code, I want to show you something really kind of cool. When I tag my images, I happen to use the Azure Container Registry a lot. So there is a setting up here, this Docker default registry in the settings of VS Code. You get command, comma, and you get the settings. And what that allows me to do is say, you know what, every time I push in Docker, this is where I'm pushing to, so just don't keep asking me for it. If you push somewhere else like Docker Hub, just put that in there. That's fine. But instead, I'm going to go here and say, okay, tag. It's going to prompt me at the top. Notice that's that value I had. It's taken the tag and the name, and it's going to tag it. And then right down here, that's the tag. Both of these point to the same image. Now, what I can do is I can take that image, and I can push it. Now, how does it know where to push? It uses the tag to figure out which registry you're using. If there's no tag specified, it defaults to Docker Hub, which is fine. That's where I push my Angular CLI image that you saw earlier. This one's going to go to Azure. So we're going to push that. And by the way, if you want to know the CLI commands, they show you over here as you're running them. Ooh, I have to authenticate. Guess what? This is what readmes are for. You have to authenticate if you use a private server. So I'm going to log into the Azure server, and then I'm going to push it again. So when you push these things up, they basically take the layers of the Docker image, they push them up to the server. If any layer is different, you're going to see the output of it. Now I could go back through here and I could run that command there. It's the same command. Or I could go ahead and just right click again and I could push. Now you notice all those layers that are kind of getting there. A lot of them existed already. If any of them change, like the last one, it'll just push that one up into the server. Notice my container is no longer running, by the way. Why? Because I'm building my production container now locally, and I don't have my environment variable set up right. So I try to start it, and it's like, look, I don't know where those things are. It's not the debug one. I could set those environment variables, and that would work. So down below, you'll see my registries now in the Docker extension. You see Docker Hub. There's that John Papa Angular CLI. And here's my Azure one. So it's logging into both servers. And once it gets into the Azure server, you should see one there called Vikings. Let's refresh. By the way, I use an insider's version of VS Code, which means every day I get a new build, which means every day is a new adventure. So let me refresh. I like to live dangerously. Here's Docker. Here's Azure. Dun, dun, dun. And once it gets to that registry, there we go. We need better icons. There's my Vikings. Notice I got an Angular app and a Vue app. There's the container I have. Now I can go right to that and I can click on this button. Take that container and deploy it to an Azure App Service. That's a really bad name for a web app. Now, we can scroll out. It's going to ask me questions that the other command didn't. It's saying, what do you want? What resource group? I don't know what a resource group is, but I'm going to pick Papa Vikings. It's like, what location do you want it in? Then it says, what plan do you want? This is like the size of the server. So I'm going to choose a new plan. I'm going to call it Papa Vikings Rule. What tier do you want? I want the most expensive because I'm not paying for it. And then I'm going to choose Papa Vikings Rule as my globally unique name for the web app. And then some funky little messages are going on down here. It's doing is it's taking that image and it's deploying it to a new web app. So what I'm imagining in the back is that Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, is sitting in a room drinking his coffee, and he gets a little light bulb flashing. He says, oh, I've got to go get a new server. And he's grabbing blades, and he's popping them in the server. This is what he does, right? And he's popping it in there, and he's putting code over with a USB drive. You know, he's making big decisions every day. And then, suddenly, the website is ready to go. Now, this website's not going to run by default, because why? I have environment variables set up, and I did not want to deploy my development time environment variables. I don't want to shove my keys up in a file on the web server. Probably my security company would be really upset at that, right? So at this point, what can I do? Well, this is where you do get to watch me for a minute. You can go to the Azure portal, or you can stay right inside of here. There's another extension called Azure App Service. That's my name, yes. That's a better icon, isn't it? The key. And then inside of there, it's going to show me all the different web apps that I have. We should have one that says Vikings Rule right here. And under Application Settings, I can do things like right-click and choose New Setting. I can say Port 80. And I think I have 8 of these. Sorry, you're going to have to watch for a moment. Node Environment, that's going to be Production now. And because I don't want to try to remember them all, we're going to go over here. Public Web. We'll type that in. Hopefully I don't fat finger anything. You'll all tell me though, won't you? Yeah, sure I will, John. We want to see you fail. I love you all too. Vikings DB. Your key goes here. Is that my key? By the way, I didn't want to do that. I clicked the wrong thing. Add new setting, my key. Now here's where you get to kind of see me go look at another file. Let's see if I can drag most of the key off screen. I work for a guy on my team, Brian Clark. He gets mad every time I open up my files and show actual keys. It's like, but they could have guessed the last 20 of them, John. Oh, now you saw them all, see? Uh-oh. Did it actually create that key? No, okay. You know what? I can change the key too. Simona's going to tell him. I can see she's texting him right now. All right. There's my port. Oh man, you can see most of the key now. Look at that. Gosh. And boom. I think I got them all. 4 Cosmos ones. Yes. Public. I thought I had 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I can't count either. Good. So they're all there. And then when I'm done, what I want to do is show you this other cool feature. I can right click and show View Streaming Logs. And when I do that, it's asking me, hey, would you like to enable logging, restart the container? Yeah, I want to see what's happening on my web server when I do this. So it's restarting the server, which is good because I changed those environment variables. It's connecting to the log streaming service. Welcome, John, you're now connected. Why, thank you, VS Code. And it's starting it, and it should say happy at the end of it. Happy, happy. Some of this information is like, why do I care? Just tell me when it's done. And if I'm impatient like I am, I could just go up and type it in. So what do we call it? Papa Vikings Rule? It was this one, right? And I believe It failed earlier because we had none of those settings. We should be able to hit it. It should spin for a minute. And once this message says it's happy, the whole app should be ready to go. Ah, there it is. See? Yay! Cloud demo worked. And then you can go and actually look at the files on the server too. So you see it's looking for the files, and it's not refreshing them. But you can see them. That's the one that was there before we deployed. So what's nice is you can go in here and you can change your application settings too. I didn't have to ever go to the portal with Azure to do anything, which is what I like. Do you like staying in your tools? Yeah, it's more fun, right? You get to code all day, use your tools and get everything up there. Okay, so kind of to wrap things up, the things that we talked about, the key points here, and I used Azure as an example because that's the cloud that I use, but you can use Docker on any cloud. Any modern cloud supports this. So doing everything inside of VS Code, building it up, getting it ready, debugging your containers, and then when you're done, once you have a Docker container, you can deploy anywhere you want. And this is really valuable for businesses. I remember when I was working at last company, there was a lot of discussions on, well, once we pick a cloud provider, we're kind of stuck with it. We're going to pick Amazon, we're going to pick Google, we're going to pick DigitalOcean or Azure, whoever. You know, because once you get into one, you kind of feel like you get used to it and you can go there. And they all have different configurations and setups. When you use Docker, though, that's not the case. With Docker, you can build your image, put it in a registry, and deploy it to any of the clouds. You can actually deploy it to more than one cloud if you want to, with redundancy. This makes executives happy, by the way. So our key points here. The CLIs will help us optimize the builds, right? Super cool that we can use these things. And why is it showing you that version? There we go. Docker makes it run everywhere, which is the thing I like. I don't have to worry anymore. I stopped getting phone calls, every couple of weeks that they had the wrong version of Node on machines because it's in the Docker file, just a recipe. And VS Code tooling makes this so much better. In fact, the tooling makes you better. You're a better programmer when your code is what you're focusing on, and the tools do the work for you, the monotonous things that you do every single day. Let the tools do this work for you. So in conclusion, to help you be better at coding, I put some links together on things that I use today that you can grab. I'll make this deck available. It'll also be in the video, but feel free to take a screenshot of it if you like. The first one is if you want to use that experimental command, which won't be experimental very long, for Azure to deploy quickly from a folder, that's the first link. If you want to go look at the source code and try this yourself, go up onto johnpapa/Vikings. I will push the Docker files up now that they exist, that we created them here today. If you want to get the Angular snippets for creating Docker files that I created, that's the third one under Angular Essentials. If you want the Docker extension, which is awesome inside of VS Code, that's the fourth link here, VSC-node. It also comes with, this one comes with the app service one that we looked at as well, so we can look at our web apps that we look in the cloud. And then finally, if you don't have an Azure account and you want to try this in Azure, you can click on this and you can get a free account. I believe Simona pays for all of those. So thanks, Simona. Thank you, Simona. And she'll get that for you. Use VS Code, use great tooling, use the Angular CLI, use Docker, and hopefully you'll have a lot more fun. Thanks for coming, everybody.